on the horizon for this group?
Howard, I can give it, sorry to interrupt here, but I can give you a metric here. We talked about this.
The haunting melody of a violin drifted through the icy February air as Caitlin Clark stepped out of a quiet Indianapolis coffee shop. But what made her freeze mid-stride wasn't simply the breathtaking music echoing across the pavement. It was the sight of the elderly black man performing it, his weathered fingers moving with a mastery that belonged in grand concert halls rather than on a busy street corner where people rushed past, barely noticing the brilliance unfolding before them. His violin case lay open at his feet, holding only a few creased dollar bills and a single faded photograph of a young girl in a basketball uniform. And when Caitlin looked closer, her breath caught painfully in her chest. For there was no mistaking him, no matter how many years had passed or how life had carved new lines into his face. Professor Marcus Thompson, the man who had taught her more about rhythm, focus, and resilience than any coach ever had. The man who had shaped her understanding of timing both on the court and in life, was now standing alone in the cold, playing for spare change on a street she had walked as a child with her hand in his, listening eagerly to his stories about music, courage, and the beauty of following one's calling. Memories surged through her like a tide breaking its barrier. West Des Moines Elementary, 2006 to 2010, where Professor Thompson had been her music teacher, mentor, and quiet hero, the person who first taught her that greatness was not merely a matter of talent but of discipline, patience, and the willingness to listen to the rhythm beneath the noise. She remembered being an 8-year-old struggling to coordinate her dribbling, growing frustrated after repeatedly losing control of the ball during PE, and how he had noticed her frustration even though she tried to hide it behind a brave little smile. Instead of letting her leave discouraged, he had kept her after school, not to drill scales or theory, but to teach her something she would carry for the rest of her life. That music and sport were not opposites but siblings, that the rhythm of dribbling echoed the beat of a song, that her footwork was a kind of choreography, and that the arc of a perfect shot required the same timing as a perfect crescendo. "Listen, little Caitlin," he told her, his warm baritone wrapping around her like a comfort blanket. "Everything in life has a rhythm, basketball, music, even breathing. When you find your rhythm, you find your power." And he had lived that belief every day, spending countless hours after school guiding not just her, but any child who needed encouragement, using his gift to help them discover theirs. Yet behind his kindness had been a sacrifice none of them had known about. In 2010, when devastating budget cuts hit the school district, music programs were the first to be dismantled. Professor Thompson had been given a terrible choice. Accept a transfer to a school across town, a move that would force him to abandon his after-school mentoring, which for many pupils was the only source of stability they had, or take early retirement with heavily reduced pension benefits. He chose retirement, not because he desired rest, but because he refused to abandon the children who depended on him, even if it meant surrendering the financial security he had spent decades building. What followed had been a series of hardships that few outside his closest circle knew about. Without his full pension, he struggled to keep up with bills. Then came Margaret's diagnosis. His beloved wife, the woman he had played violin duets with on quiet Sunday evenings, struck by Alzheimer's, slipping slowly into the shadows of her own mind. Medical expenses piled up. He took odd jobs, tutored privately, even sold his treasured piano, the instrument he had bought with his first year of teacher's salary, to cover her care. When Margaret passed away in 2018, he was left with nothing but his violin, a studio flat, and a world that carried on without noticing the quiet, dignified man who had once shaped so many young lives. Now 73, living on minimal social security and the few dollars he earned from street performances. He played despite the arthritis that stiffened his hands, because music remained the only language through which he could still connect to a world that had forgotten the brilliance he once carried into every classroom. As Caitlin approached him that afternoon, the melody flowing from his violin sent shivers down her spine, not because of the cold, but because she recognized the tune instantly. Amazing Grace, the same hymn he had used to teach her about second chances, about the healing woven into music, the reminder that no one was ever too lost to find their way home. His eyes were closed, his face reflecting both the ache of his circumstances and the peace that came from creating something beautiful in spite of them. "Professor Thompson," she whispered, her voice trembling as the city hummed around them. And when he opened his eyes, confusion flickered briefly before dissolving into the warm, familiar smile she had carried in her memory for over 15 years. "Little Caitlin," he murmured, his bow stilling midair, as though the past had suddenly caught up with him. In that moment, the distance between who she had become and who he had once been collapsed entirely, leaving only the truth that sometimes the people who shape us most deeply vanish from our lives not because they stop caring, but because life tests them in ways we cannot imagine. And when they reappear, often by chance, they carry stories and sacrifices capable of redefining everything we believe about gratitude, legacy, and the quiet heroes who make great
CBA on the horizon and what next year's free agency will look like. We feel like we've accomplished a great deal already.
Caitlin felt her breath hitch as she stepped closer, unable to believe that the man sitting before her, the man whose music had once filled her childhood with warmth and direction, was now playing for coins beneath the harsh sting of a February wind. And when Professor Thompson looked up at her with tear-filled eyes and whispered, "Is that really you?" she knelt beside him and replied softly, "It's me, Professor. I can't believe I found you. I've thought about you so many times over the years." He carefully set down his violin, his hands trembling from cold and emotion, and stared at her with a pride that made her heart ache. "Look at you," he murmured, his voice thick with wonder. "I've watched you on television whenever I could find the matches. I always knew you were destined for greatness, but seeing you become who you are, seeing you inspire so many young people, it fills this old heart with more joy than I can express." But what he didn't realize was that Caitlin was about to change his life entirely. Gently, she asked, "Professor, what are you doing out here?" Though the answer lingered painfully in the worn-out coat that offered little warmth, the tired shoes, and the way his hands shook with more than sentiment. "Oh, he replied with a dignity that made her chest tighten. "Just sharing music with the world. Music deserves to be heard, not locked away in concert halls where only a few can experience it." Caitlin looked at this man who had shaped her sense of rhythm, timing, and excellence, and felt a fire ignite within her. This was not a mere act of charity. It was an opportunity to honor someone whose influence had helped carve the very path of her life. "Professor," she said softly, her voice firming with resolve, "I'm going to ask you something, and I need the truth. Are you managing? Do you have a proper place to live? Are you eating enough?" His carefully held composure shattered then, and tears slid down his face. "I'm managing, little Caitlin," he whispered, though the strain in his voice betrayed him. "I have a small place and I get by, but since Margaret passed, it's been difficult. Some days the music is the only thing that keeps me going." In that moment, Caitlin knew exactly what she needed to do. She realized that life's most profound moments often arrive not when we receive help, but when we have the chance to give it, especially to those who gave to us when we were young and in need of direction. Standing on that pavement, she understood that all her achievements, fame and influence would mean very little if she did nothing to honor the man who had helped shape them. Taking his hands, she said, "Professor Thompson, you're coming with me today, right now, and I'm going to make sure you never worry about food or shelter again." He tried to protest, torn between pride and need, but she stopped him with a gentle smile. "You taught me about rhythm, remember? This is life completing its circle. You gave to me when I was small and needed guidance. Now I can give back to you. That's not charity, that's family." What followed demonstrated the power of gratitude made real. Caitlin didn't simply arrange temporary support. She purchased a warm, safe two-bedroom apartment for him in a senior living community with both independence and support, ensuring he had access to excellent health care, including treatment for the arthritis that had been stealing his ability to play comfortably. But perhaps the most beautiful part was what she did with his musical talent. She invited him to become the music director for her foundation's youth programs, where he could inspire a new generation of children just as he had inspired her. She even helped him establish a scholarship fund for disadvantaged children, ensuring no child would ever be denied the gift of music because of budget cuts or financial hardship. Their reunion quickly became a symbol of something larger than a touching personal story. It represented the idea that true greatness is measured not by what one achieves individually, but by how one honors the people who helped forge the path. 6 months later, Professor Thompson was thriving in his new role, adored by children who called him Professor T, and listened in awe as he taught them not just scales and technique, but lessons about perseverance, discipline, and finding one's rhythm in life. His arthritis was well managed, his home was secure, and perhaps most importantly, he had rediscovered his purpose. The story went viral not through orchestrated publicity, but through the heartfelt reactions of people who saw the photos and videos of the two of them teaching, laughing, and rebuilding the mentorship that had once changed a young girl's life. How incredible, people wondered, that a music teacher's lessons on timing could shape the career of a global basketball icon, and then return decades later in a moment of grace and gratitude. Today, at 74, Professor Thompson lives comfortably, surrounded by students whose eyes reflect the same spark Caitlin once carried, playing his violin each day not on windy pavements but in warm, bright rooms filled with hope. And their stories